You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston and Chris Trent, episode number 88.
88 is great.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, your hosts, Jody Livingston and Chris Trent.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. We want to welcome you. If it's your first time checking out the show, we are glad you are here. And if you're a faithful listener, well, welcome on back. Show notes today can be found at thelongerhaul.com/episode 088. That's thelongerhaul.com.
88 is great.
88 is great.
Jody, you want to take a stab at when I graduated high school there, Jody?
When I was 8.
Ouch. But yes, 1988. What? The 80s, man. We are in the 80s. We're in the best episodes ever because we're in the 80s, and the 80s are the best. I'm wearing my acid washed jeans right now, just the record, and my denim jacket, and I'm solving a Rubik's Cube while watching a movie from Blockbuster.
Sweet. You're over the top for this.
Blockbuster was more like the early 90s, I think. Now that I think about it.
Probably so. I wouldn't know. What's a Blockbuster? I'm just kidding.
You knew what Blockbuster was.
I know. I'm just kidding. When we moved recently, we found our old Blockbuster card.
Dude, that's nuts.
Shoved in a drawer. You know, we're like, what is that?
Just in case.
My gosh.
Just in case.
Blockbuster, just in case they come back.
Well, hey, Jody, there is a youth pastor in California, and I am a youth pastor in Georgia, and we love youth pastors. We are youth pastors. We love teenagers most of all. We both feel called to work with students. We've been doing it for a while, and the reason we do this podcast, if it's your first time, is to hopefully be an encouragement to you as you are trying to experience the longer haul in youth ministry. So that's what this is all about. And you can find Jody at Jody Livingston and on the Instagram and I don't know, whatever else you're on.
Wherever. I don't either.
Yeah. And I'm at Chris Trent. So that's pretty simple. Lots of fun pics there. Not really. But we post every once in a while. Just not a ton. We're not like social media nuts. We're not like wild into it. But,
That's because we're from the 80s.
From time to time. So, yeah. 80s. I actually do literally remember it was actually early 90s when it happened. But I do remember whenever email came out and I picked up the disc.
The AOL disc.
No, it was actually
Juno.
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 Yeah. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah. And Netscape. Netscape.
Oh my gosh. I've seen a lot. So crazy. Yeah, man. How you doing, man? What's going on in California right now? What are you up to these days? What are you working on right now?
So I'm literally we're recording this in the middle of like a junior high missions thing.
That's cool.
That we're doing. So I don't know if you can tell, but last night I was helping lead games for like a crap ton of junior high kids, so my throat's a little scratchy. So it's good. Yeah, that's going well. And of course, we're full swing of promoting camp and
camp
planning for the fall. We got lots of plans for the fall. We're pulling together and
good.
Yeah. How about you?
I am leaving tomorrow with a bunch of seniors headed to Peru. My first time to South America. I'm feeling very festive, but headed down there. We take our seniors to Peru every year, and my son is a senior this year. And also with my most recent responsibility changes, I'm going to go check out what we do down there so that if I'm ever in a meeting and they talk about what we do in Peru, I'll be like, yeah, actually, no, I've been. So I'm really excited, man. I've never been. It's, we partnered down there with a guy named Pepe, and super cool stuff. I do know about it, but I've just never been. So I'm really pumped, man.
Yeah.
A little nervous about like the water and stuff though, man. Unfortunately, it's a pretty like we have people get sick every year. So I'm like, oh no, dreading this. We won't talk about what that is, but let's just say that I've got some Cipro already with me just in case.
Look at you.
But yeah, man. So I'll be gone all next week, man. And so you will not be getting any pictures from me from Chewy's next week.
Darn.
It'll be right when I get back. So
I'm gonna find something here.
What is it? What is your restaurant like? When you've been gone a while and you come back, like you probably don't even know that yet. Like because you're in California, you're new there.
We're still trying to find
Chewy's is that
restaurant.
place. Like we've been gone for a bit, and like we haven't really. We're like Chewy's. Let's go get some Chewy's.
Yeah, the unofficial, unknown sponsor of this podcast.
They should sponsor us. I'm saying. But I sent you the other day. I was there. Did you get my rant?
Yeah, I don't even respond anymore.
I know. I don't think people actually believe that it happened, but it like legitimately happens. Like where I send pictures just to rub it in your face.
Yeah, I've just given up on responding. I don't even know what to say.
You could like send me pics of like
brother to stumble.
In-N-Out. Do you have an In-N-Out in your town, by the way?
Oh my gosh, we have like a billion In-N-Outs.
Like really? Dude. That's good. I like it. You can't say you don't like it because you're in California. Because
no, it's okay.
All California people are supposed to love In-N-Out.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, there.
It's good.
I think you just revealed how you really feel. It's okay.
It's good.
All right.
I think it's one of those things people just build up, and then you get here and you're like,
for a job back in the South. If anybody knows anything,
where I miss In-N-Out for the rest of my life. It's good. It's like, it's like Chick-fil-A. We have to drive a bit to get to a Chick-fil-A where I am. But
our Chick-fil-A is about to finally. So our Chick-fil-A, we have one right by our church, and it has been torn down now. Do you remember the one by our church? Do you remember seeing it?
Yeah.
Okay,
is that the one that your son worked at?
My son worked at. He's going back here short. He's been working at a different one for a little bit, but they tore it down because it's one of the older ones. It's been around a long time, and drive-through has, they just have learned so much, and the whole layout of the store, they just missed it. It wasn't good, and getting in and out of that thing was just terrible. And the only way they could fix it was literally a teardown, complete teardown, and they actually moved the entire building. But it's been so rainy here in Georgia, and it has taken forever. People are going nuts, man. So it's really funny. Like to get to a Chick-fil-A, it's like 15 minutes or something. First world problems, right? Hashtag first world problems.
Pitiful you.
Yeah, I know.
Southern problems. That's what that is.
Yeah, seriously. And so, yeah, man, it's about to open up, though, in about a month. Everybody's so pumped.
Dang.
Good times.
I just want them to open one in my town.
I am excited about our friends at YM360, by the way. It probably is not too late to check out their amazing devotional that they have for Easter. I think you could probably...
Depending on when you're listening.
Depending on when you're listening. If it's after
Easter.
If it's after Easter, it's too late. Which is possible.
Somebody's on their way to camp, like binge listening, and they're like, "What? No!"
Shout out. Hope you have a great weekend camp. But in all seriousness, it's a great one. But even if you don't need that, man, they've YM360, so many great resources. And speaking of camp, an amazing camp experience at Generate. And so check those guys out. They love us, and we appreciate that. And they support us because they love youth pastors, and they all serve in youth ministry. And I was just looking online. Andy Blanks, one of the co-founders and the main editor writer for them, was just speaking to students just the other day. So good times. So yeah, check those guys out. And then also big shout out to our friends at the Georgia Student Ministry Network. It's the, studentministrynetwork.com. Is that right, Jody? Yep. And Georgia Baptist Mission Board. You don't have to be Baptist to use it, though. You don't have to live in Georgia to use it. Great folks. They just love youth pastors as well. And they just came alongside us and said, hey, we want to help you out. So appreciate those guys. Check out what they're doing. Maybe jot them a little text or something, or send them a little note just saying, hey, thanks for supporting the longer haul. That'd be awesome. So yeah, that's that. Good podcast. Speaking of Georgia Baptist, the way we got the podcast that we're going to listen to today, or the interview that we're going to listen to today, is we were at Conclave. This is the final Conclave interview that we have, and I didn't really know Nick. You knew Nick before we got there, right?
Yeah. So Nick served at a church just like 2 miles from me, and was doing student ministry there. And so, I met him. He was one of the first people I met when I went down to the Atlanta area to serve. Great guy, man. Great guy. Just an infectious personality. Hard not to like him.
Yeah, it's good. And the interview, I just listened. It had been a while since we'd done it, so I listened again just to get ready. And it turned out really well. And I love his story because he really talks about just trusting God when your ministry calling changes. And he really digs into sort of his story as far as how he transitioned, how he got into youth ministry in the first place, and then what that looked like when he went into college. And anyway, you'll hear him talk about it, so I don't need to tell y'all. But he mainly speaks about how it was important for him just to trust God's calling on his life in the midst of all of that. And so I think it's good. Let me ask you this. I'm curious, Jody, for you, I think all youth pastors experience like change at different times, right? So you go into a church and like, oh, you're the youth pastor. And then 6 months in, 1 year in, 3 years in, who knows how, all of a sudden, oh, actually, we're asking you to do this now also, or this instead. Does that happen to you?
Oh, sure. And to a degree, everywhere you go, right? I mean, the two that were probably the kind of the biggest take on, the responsibility to take on that was outside really of the scope of student ministry would be kind of our greeters, guest services at one point. So, taking that and I got all of our, okay, what do we do with first time guests, and that was a lot to juggle because it was happening at the same time, right? Those things are happening at the same time on a weekend or a certain Sunday morning. So that was a huge one, which was kind of outside my norm and my comfort zone, but it ended up being great and paid a ton of benefit towards student ministry, even now, and then the other was just taking on the college ministry as well. And so that one seems like it's probably a little more similar than to youth ministry, but we were like 5 minutes from the university. So it wasn't just like, oh, you have the kids that graduated who stayed. Like you're now all of a sudden having to figure out how to navigate a college campus and partner with campus ministries effectively. And they're just at a different stage of life for sure. And so for us, like I really made an effort to keep that as much as I could as like a separate thing. So it wasn't just like youth ministry, like extra credit or overtime, and so those were both different because I was very surprised at how different college ministry was than student ministry. To be honest, I was probably a little naive on that. What about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think all youth pastors have experienced that moment. Anybody going into youth ministry, they experience that moment where you all of a sudden are having to do other things, right? And sometimes it's stuff you don't necessarily want to do. But I'm telling you, I don't know of very many people who are only doing youth ministry and don't also have to chip in with other responsibilities of the church.
Oh,
right?
Sure.
And I'm talking about like, and listen, you don't have to listen to us very long to know that Jody and I are both in sort of larger contexts now as far as size of church, and larger staff and all that. But even still, man, I'm doing things now that aren't directly tied. They don't feel directly tied to youth ministry. I mean, there are days where I'm like, dude, I just want to hang out with some teenagers, For me, it happened when I was living in Texas, though, and my first full-time gig out there. A few years in, church had grown. We built a new building, like an addition to the building kind of thing, and expanded our worship center. And we went through that whole process. And all of a sudden there was this need for someone to take on the responsibility of building and grounds and property and space, is what we called it. Like it was, and so
I love that so much.
Yeah. And so I'm gifted in administration. So, I think it was like a natural opportunity, let's call it that, for me to take on that responsibility. So all of a sudden I was managing, we had 3 like custodial type staff. And so I supervised those folks, but then also was in charge of building and grounds, so I was the youth pastor, but I was also on any given Sunday up on top of one of the roofs with an air conditioning guy.
Because that sounds administrative.
Yeah. Well, you'd have to administrate all. I mean, you got to plan well and all that. So the beautiful part was I got rid of, to do that. Whenever I got that, I was able to negotiate my way out of transportation. I was responsible for our 3 vans. Good grief, man. That was a good change for me. But it was funny, because all of a sudden I had to do that stuff, and then you have to trust God and all that, honestly. And I think Nick talks a little bit about that. Now his is a bigger picture of that, is like what happens when your actual, overall job changes, right? So you're not talking about some things were added to us. But you and I have also both transitioned from one church to another that had different roles. And I'm in the middle of that right now, going from really just functioning as the middle school pastor to being responsible for our entire student ministry and providing leadership for our team and hiring people and all that stuff. And so I think it's important in the midst of that, because there are moments where I'm going, dang it, like I didn't know that I was getting into this part, right? And I love what Nick says. It's a super encouraging. He's funny. It's encouraging. Stick around to the end. He just gives a blessing at the end on youth pastors, and it's worth listening to for sure.
Yeah, indeed. All right. You ready?
I'm ready, man. Let's take a listen.
All right. Here we go. Here's today's interview with Nick Person.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
All right. So here we go. Nick.
Yes.
Thanks for jumping on, man. We appreciate it. Here at Conclave.
Glad to be here.
Continuing on. I'm glad you're here. We've met. We were actually at churches really close to each other.
Yes. What, 2 miles apart?
Like 2 miles apart. So we served there in the same area for a while. And so, man, it's cool just to get to hang out, see you again. So thanks for taking some time to come on. I know you're leading and teaching main sessions, so you got some other responsibilities. So taking time here is cool. I think what we're hoping, because you've transitioned, you were in student ministry for a while, and then it transitioned into more of a teaching pastor role. You're a real pastor now.
I know, it's crazy.
You made it, man. You made it.
I've arrived now.
So, maybe a little bit of what that was like, because obviously student ministry is still a huge part of your heart. You're here at a student ministry conference. What was it that happened that kind of drew you to student ministry? And then at what point did you start to recognize that God was really calling you to a different type of role?
Yeah. Well, what drew me to youth ministry is I gave my life to Christ in 7th grade. And my family had started going to a church in Marietta, Georgia, and they had a student ministry. I had never experienced that before. They called their Sunday school small groups. I was like, what is this?
Small
I know, whoa. It still felt like Sunday school, same time, but just called it a different name. And so I gave my life to Christ, and so I had a really impactful time in student ministry. And I felt the call to ministry in middle school, which I was a little perturbed about, because I was like, Lord, come on now. Right. I'm a middle school boy. Give me some time to make my testimony good, right? But he just kept affirming that. And so I knew I had this call in my life for student ministry, just because my life was changed in student ministry. And so when I graduated high school, I go off to college, I start interning. And if interning doesn't scare you away, it lets you know that this is where you're supposed to be, because you're not getting paid much, but
That's
you're doing
the ministry of college or of closet cleaning is what that is.
Amen to that, brother. And if you're like
the ministry of, hey, can you go to the store and get some marshmallows?
And then you're excited about it. You're like, I just got those marshmallows that those kids are playing Chubby Bunny with. We do not in any way suggest that you play Chubby Bunny because people have lost their lives. But you're like, I played a part in that. I got to do that. And so, man, and I just stepped into that. And the cool thing was my student pastor just kept giving me opportunities. He was the first guy that gave me an opportunity to communicate. It was probably horrible. I don't remember what it was about, but I do remember one of my students, another student came up to me and was like, hey, man, my first time communicating was even worse than that. And so I was like, I don't think that was a compliment.
Yeah, I don't know if that's good or bad.
But yeah, and so, man, and really what happened, just doors just kept opening. So I was interning at the church, and then the middle school pastor kind of stepped away, and they're like, hey, no one's doing middle school. And I didn't like middle school kids because they were smelly and weird, but yet the Lord was like, hey, Nick, won't you trust me? And so I just stepped into that, and I ended up loving middle school ministry. And I did that for the majority of my student ministry time was middle school.
Yeah.
And just learned some really important lessons, and, man, I loved it. I felt like I grew up with them, though. It was kind of a weird, like, in your early 20s, you're like, they trust me with a church van and with a credit card. Woo!
Dude, I drove a church van like in my 20s, and I look back and go, what in the world? Why did they let me do that?
Whose idea was that?
Whose idea was that?
Like, you wouldn't do that with another
early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I understand. Like, you peel a wheel going out of the parking lot. You're like, sorry, my bad.
I didn't mean to jump the curb. It just, it's spatial awareness is tough in a van.
But it was good, man. So I just really fell in love, and then those doors just kept opening. So I did middle school for a while. And then our high school pastor stepped out, and so I did high school. And then they were like, hey, do you want to be the student pastor? Which I was really confused by what the difference was.
Right.
I was like, I thought I was.
I was doing
and they're like,
student
no. You kind of get to tell the other people what to do, kind of.
Yeah,
and so I was like, okay. So I did that
fun.
for a while, and then just kept walking through doors and loved student ministry, learned so much, challenged so much. And you're walking with kids at some of the hardest times of their lives, with family changes, with life happening. And the thing is, you don't have the answers, but you're like, hey, we'll figure it out together. We'll look at God's word and see what he has to say about it, and we'll just figure it out. And, man, it really, really, really changed me. And so loved doing it. And I really honestly thought I'd be in student ministry forever. Because I loved kids, and I loved hanging out with students, and I loved seeing students get it, and I really believed that they could change the world. And then they start believing that, and then they start doing it. And so you're like, I'm here. I'm in. I don't have to deal with adults except parents. That's a whole nother story. But then I remember I was working at a church, and we had some college interns. And that summer, something just shifted in me. It was almost as if I still love students, and I still hang out with students to this day. But there was something that shifted in me, like, hey, these college interns that you're hanging out with, like, I'm enjoying the conversations I'm having with them even more than I'm having with these students. And they're making the most important decisions of their life right now, like who they're going to marry, what they're going to do vocationally. And I get to speak into it, and they're listening to me.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I really, really dig this. And then at the church I was working at, they had an opportunity. They didn't have a college ministry, and they were like, hey, do you want to do it? And I was like, I guess so. And so I just started doing that. And also at that time, I got the opportunity to speak. I call it Big Church. That's
Big church,
student
yeah.
ministry
That's
world.
what it is.
Yes, it is. It's
Big
Big
church.
Church. That's
So
what it
I
is.
got to speak in Big Church, and I love that too. I was like, oh, I'm not intimidated by adults as much anymore. Like,
I am one.
yeah,
I think this happened.
I even got kids, so I kind of fit in, and just started doing that. And really, the door just kept opening, more opportunities to do that, and I love that as well. And you just kind of have this wrestling of, like, God, I feel like you're opening the door, not because I'm choosing to, just because the door is opening, and I just want to be obedient. And so really, it was about obedience and just stepping into that. So that's kind of how the shift happened.
So, like, if somebody, so the podcast, when we're doing the Longer Haul podcast, one of the things that drives us is we're seeing guys not stick around or they feel the pressure to kind of move up, whatever. And yet we both acknowledge and have acknowledged many times that just because you're in student ministry doesn't mean that you're going to stay, that God does call people beyond, and we've talked about this too. Like, we actually believe that, like, youth pastors make amazing senior pastors and teaching pastors because of the context of student ministry.
Yeah, we kind of fundamentally disagree with the idea that, you shouldn't use youth ministry as a stepping stone. We know that a lot of youth pastors say that kind of stuff, and they mean it as a platform or whatever. But we kind of think God had maybe have a bigger plan than what we have. You know, and so we're saying, No, man, if God's path for someone is to become a youth pastor and then to become a pastor, we need to not think that we somehow know better than God what that path is for that person. So we're kind of on board with that. Yeah.
So how would you say, as somebody who's kind of gone through that transition, where's the healthy place in that tension? Like, how do you wrestle through that? Does that make sense?
It does. So the Lord had to do a lot of work on my heart. So one of the main things that I had to learn was I had this wrong view of ministry. And what I mean by that is I ranked ministry importance. So I was like, well, a middle school pastor is not nearly as important as a high school pastor, and a high school pastor is not nearly as important and doesn't have as much influence as a student pastor, and so on and so forth. Right. And so the Lord, I remember,
poor preschool ministers.
I know. They don't. Do we even count them as ministers? I mean, we probably call them
nursery workers.
We don't even count you. And so the Lord had to do a work on my heart, and really the thing was, it's not lesser ministry, it's different ministry.
Yes.
Like, that was the thing. And for so long I thought, man, I'm going to move up. It's not really moving up, it's shifting influence. Because as a student pastor, you are influencing students that are going to lead the world. So it's not a lesser calling and it's not lesser influence. It's just a different influence. And so for me, and what I would encourage people to think about is when you're thinking about that shift of, hey, Lord, I want to do what you've called me to do. You're not betraying student pastors around the world when you say, hey, I'm stepping out of student ministry. You're going, thank you, God, that you have prepared me for such a time as this to step into something that's different and just be willing to step. And granted, and also recognize that how God is using you right where you are is still important, and you are still leveraging influence, and you are still having an impact. And it's not a lesser calling, just a different calling. Like that was the thing I had to learn. And so it kind of freed me up to go, hey, Lord, I'm willing to step wherever you call me to step. If that's being in student ministry for the next 40 years, praise God. If that's doing something different in the context of the body, praise God. I just want to be willing, and I just want to have a healthy view of what you're calling me to.
How much of that struggle do you think has to do with identity? In the sense of, like, your identity has been, was for so long. Like, I am a student pastor, right? I am a middle school pastor. And, man, to step into another role means I have to take on another, you know what I'm saying? Like that. How much of that do you feel is that?
Well, and you have to step out of what's comfortable too, right? You kind of navigate student ministry well, and you kind of go, I kind of get it. I mean, even though culture changes, but you can kind of just shift along with culture, and it has everything to do with identity. I remember some of the first times I spoke in big church, people would come up to me trying to be very encouraging and go, hey man, that was really good for a student pastor. And you're like, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if you're like, I don't belong here. It's like, hey,
a backhanded compliment.
Exactly. And so you're like, I don't belong here, but you feel this calling by God, but then you're thinking, no, God just made me to talk to people 18 and under. Anybody else, God's not going to listen to me. And God's like, hey, Nick, it's the same word.
Yeah.
It's the same word. And people are still dealing with identity in the same issues, except as an adult, you have even more to lose, really. Instead of breaking up with your girlfriend, you're getting a divorce, and so it's similar stuff, just the consequences look a little differently. And so it's all about identity, because you also start believing that you are the job. Like, I am a student pastor instead of I am a son or daughter of the king called to do this thing. Right now he's entrusted to me, and I will do the next thing he entrusts to me. And so it's all about perspective and having the right view of what you're doing. But identity, I mean, who you are gets so entangled with what you do, and you don't even realize it. And then you're like, wait a second, I'm holding on so tightly to this student ministry thing that I can't be open-handed if the Lord wants to give me something else.
Yeah.
It's good. As we look towards the end of this thing, man, this has been awesome. Wondering it. So most of our listeners, they're serving all over the country. We even have a couple of listeners in Australia now.
Wow, come on,
Whitter, right?
Come on, I'm about to sing some men at work right now. It's awesome.
And now they just unjoined their podcast.
I'm sorry about that. I'm just kidding.
No, as you think about what you've done from a standpoint of being a youth pastor, and as you think about your role now as a pastor, as a dad, right? Wonder if you could just speak into their hearts for just a minute, just kind of just a blessing on them in terms of what they're doing.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, most definitely. I would just like to encourage everybody, just know that first you're called to be a child of God. Like, that's your initial calling. And I think if you can get that right, if you can understand and sit in front of the King and reflect him well, all the other stuff really will fall into place. So your chief calling is not to be the job. Your chief calling is you have been called a son or daughter of the King. That's your first calling. Your second calling is you have been blessed with the ministry of being a spouse, a parent. That's the next calling on your life. It's not what you get paid to do. It's what God has entrusted only you to do. And I think about that with my kids. And so do that well. And then the work stuff, I'm telling you, if you get the first things, if you get the big rocks in the container first, all the little stuff will fit in. And so fix your eyes on Jesus, because you walk towards what your eyes are fixed upon. And so keep doing that and continue to allow the Lord to fill you up and to pour out what he's pouring in. And keep going. The Lord sees you, the Lord loves you, and the Lord is for you. He's not mad at you. He's not telling you to do a better job. He's just inviting you to dine at this table over and over again. And so I pray that you accept that invitation and eat until you are full.
Yeah. And I love that, because what I just heard right there, Jody, we are all the time talking about longevity. We talk about in youth ministry, and that's our, obviously that's our tribe. Mm-hmm. But what I love about what you just said, Nick, is it applies to longevity, not so much youth ministry longevity, mm-hmm. but just longevity period when it comes to just walking with Jesus. Mm-hmm. Keep your eyes on Jesus, man, and that's super, super awesome, man. Yeah. Dude, thank you for spending some time with us.
Thanks for letting me be on and hang out with you guys. And hello, Australians. I'm sorry about the Men at Work comment. Please keep following.
That's okay. Out of our 12 listeners, it only makes up like a couple.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
No problem.
I missed that guy. He's a guy you just want to hang around.
It really is. I mean, it was super encouraging. And I had not met him, and I just sit there and was like soaking that up, man, and just super energized by his leverage. And he ended up later on, he had not done his main session yet. And so he was great. Such an encouragement to the room, in front of all the youth pastors and in the room. There were 800 or so people there, and just super encouraging, man. So I appreciate him coming on big time.
He's a good dude. And we've talked about before, and I mean, several times, right? That there's, even though we do this podcast on longevity, and we want folks to stay in youth ministry for a long time and see it as a valid thing, not treat it as a stair step, or not just burn out and leave, or give up and quit, or move on to the next thing. We've also talked about the fact that we acknowledge that, man, I think youth ministry prepares you well.
Yes, big time.
For other things. And so if you're listening and you're like, wait a minute, I don't understand. No, well, just know that's our heart in that too. Our heart is for you to stay, but most of all, our heart is for you to be obedient, whatever that would look like. So
totally. And Jody, no joke, you saying that is interesting, because the whole time I was listening to it, I was thinking, man, there's somebody going to be listening today. And I'm not trying to speak some kind of prophetic word over anybody, but I just sort of thought, man, I was like, man, there's probably going to be a couple people listening today that they're going through this right now. Like, they're wrestling through what's next, and should they be, and they maybe are feeling a little bit like they're being disloyal to youth ministry if they think about leaving. But I think it's okay if God's calling you. We don't want to lose you, but and we'll make fun of you behind your back. There's no question.
Oh yeah, for sure. And all kinds of real pastor jokes, and
got all kinds. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Getting called up from the minors.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, thanks for Nick. Hey, don't forget our sponsors, YM360. Appreciate those folks big time. Even if you don't, even if you're not purchasing anything from those guys, and you ever wanted to just send them a note just saying, hey, thanks for supporting the longer haul. That'd mean a lot to us. That'd be huge. And that way they know that their money is being well spent. So good times. Man, anything else for you?
That's it. I think that'll do it for this week.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We really do appreciate you.
Cool. Catch you guys in the next episode. Later.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.